Mr. President, thank you so much. Welcome to the 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum Day. And I want to say to you, Majority Leader, thank you so much for making today possible. Also to the Secretary of the Senate, to Allie, for all the behind-the-scenes work that goes into a day like today. We appreciate it. And you mentioned, Majority Leader, you mentioned my predecessor, Senator Patty Ritchie, who started this thing up. I was actually on her staff in 2012 when we started the very first 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum Day here in the Senate chamber. And this has been a time-honored tradition that I am so proud to carry the torch on alongside an excellent selection that you made, if I might add, for your Veterans and Military Affairs Chair, and Jessica Scarcella-Spanton. She's been great to work with on 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum Day and veterans issues in general. And Leader, thank you so much for your support of today and of veterans. Please pass back from all of us to General Anderson, gentlemen. Give him our best. Major General Anderson is deployed forward in Europe right now. He would have been up where the President of the Senate is today, delivering those remarks himself if he was stateside, but it's a perfect example, Leader, or as you pointed out, of the time-honored tradition, the storied legacy of the 10th Mountain Division. They have a saying, and it is so true, that the sun never sets on the 10th Mountain Division patch because they are forward in all kinds of places around the globe, training, fighting, keeping us safe. You know, as host of the 10th Mountain Division, I think of Fort Drum, the economic impact of, being a military community and supporting their mission. But as United States citizens, you should know that that recognizable patch that the Leader mentioned of cross bayonets with a mountain tab over it is something that we should all be very proud as New Yorkers to be the host. To Colonel Brayman, thank you so much for your remarks. And if you didn't hear the message from him, I'll repeat it once again. Recruit, recruit, recruit. There's an excellent division here in New York State where young men and women from your districts can continue to call home in New York, and there is a place for them in this United States Army, I promise. To CSM Mobar, thanks for being here today. Again, pass along our best to Major General Anderson, and thank you for all the leadership that you provide. And to Lieutenant Colonel Cleveland, thank you for all the organization today, for our Mayor of Fort Drum, also known on the Army side as a garrison commander, to Jim Zucchino. Thank you, sir, for all of the work that you do to mesh our homes and make sure that there's good integration between our community in the North Country and yours. And I do want to, on behalf of the members here, invite some of those guests that were mentioned earlier. So just for your situational awareness, and I'll read off their rank and their last name as well as the town that they're from. And this just represents a small portion. I promise after a 4-day weekend, the commander at Fort Drum didn't send all of New York soldiers down from Fort Drum to sit in the gallery today because they have important work to do. But here's just a splash, just a representation of the types of troops that are at Fort Drum. Sure, they're from nations around the world gaining their citizenship through our United States Army program. They're from all over the country and happen to be stationed at our beautiful Fort Drum. But there's also New Yorkers like Sergeant First Class Webster from Blossville, like Staff Sergeant McLeod from Brooklyn, like Staff Sergeant Santos from Hobbs, New Windsor, like Staff Sergeant Arzu from Brooklyn, like Sergeant Poole from Brooklyn, and there's a Brooklyn theme here, but all 5 boroughs, I promise, are represented in the 10th Mountain Division, like Sergeant Toussaint from Brooklyn, like Sergeant Krim from Ilion, home of Remington Arms, like Sergeant Doyle from Carthage, like Sergeant DeLuna from Brooklyn, like Specialist Baudot from Center Reach, like Specialist Vasquez from Manhattan, who turns wrenches on a lot of the Army vehicles that keep rolling along, like Specialist Finney from the Bronx, like Private First Class Shackleford from Rocky Point, like PV2 Marvin from Corning in the Finger Lakes. And a special shout out to First Lieutenant Ali Rios from Carthage, New York, who graduated with my brother-in-law, no less. Now, there in the gallery are first-generation Americans and sometimes some long-standing traditions of military service, or colloquially we'll call them military brats. But no matter what their family history or where they're from, they put on the same uniform, and despite what patch they might have for combat or for the unit that they're with, they all wear the United States flag, and it looks backwards when you look at an Army uniform, but there's only one reason for that, and it's because the Army is always charging forward. They all wear our flag, and they all call New York State home. Today, we're also joined by some excellent groups of advocacy, led by Advocate Drug and joined by the Tug Hill Commission, Fort Drum Health Liaison Organization, the Development Authority of the North Country, the Greater Watertown Chamber of Commerce, and the Planning Today for Tomorrow. These are just some of the groups that are impacted by the presence of the largest single-site employer in New York State. As was said about the history, the Army installation located in Jefferson County has a long and incredible history dating back to the War of 1812, where Sackett's Harbor, which was a consequential place for the Navy, no less, became the headquarters for the northern frontier. In the post-war, the United States realized the importance of training troops, which led to the creation of Madison Barracks. And by 1907, firearm technology outgrew that area of the Madison Barracks. The Army looked for a new location, landing on the area in Felts Mills, just north of the Black River. A small tent encampment was born under the name Camp Hughes, which was mentioned earlier by the majority leader. Just a year later, President Ulysses Grant's oldest son, Frederick, led a militia of 8,000 men through the Northeast and discovered Pine Plains above Black River to be a vital resource to train troops. Money was allocated to purchase the land, and Pine Camp was born. And in 1951, Pine Camp became Camp Drum, was utilized in the Korean conflicts due to its advantages of tough terrain and climate. And in the Army, it certainly gets a reputation for the climate, because you get every amount of weather you could imagine at Fort Drum. In 1974, a permanent garrison was assigned, and the post was designated Fort Drum. But we know Fort Drum for when the 10th Mountain Division came in 1985 and was officially reactivated in northern New York. Fort Drum now consists of 107,000 acres of well-managed wildlife refuge that soldiers also train in. Mobilization and training of almost 8,000 troops annually. So not just the active duty of the 10th Mountain Division, but the National Guard and the reserves heavily use this area, many of them from areas in your community. It's the largest single-site employer in New York State that was mentioned earlier, and Fort Drum is not just vital to the protection of our country, but it is a huge economic driver for the state of New York, as the majority leader pointed out earlier, $1.6 billion to our economy. Not insignificant whatsoever. So Fort Drum has a motto that was mentioned earlier, and that's climb to glory, and the proper response is to the top. And New York State also has its own motto, and it's written on our seal, Excelsior, meaning ever upward. And I always love to compare the 10th Mountain Division's motto to ours, because I think our 10th Mountain Division goes hand in hand with the motto of New York State. The 10th Mountain Division Light Fighters are the embodiment of our motto of Excelsior, meaning ever upward. The sun never sets on the 10th Mountain Division patch. They train hard, and they are known by the United States Army as the blue-collar division. They are ready to just get after it and get to work with what the Army needs done. They lean forward and they innovate. They remain ready to fight for us on a moment's notice, and all you have to do is watch their deployment cycles to know that they're always doing so. Yesterday, as Minority Leader Ort mentioned, was Memorial Day, and we paused to honor the war dead. Today, the 10th Mountain Division and Fort Drum Day, I appreciate the opportunity that we've been given today to pause and honor those who are still climbing to glory. And I would say to you, soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division, keep climbing, Excelsior, and we'll see you at the top. Thank you, Mr. President.